declared, "The liberation of Palestine and putting an end to Zionist penetration into Muslim states is one of the duties of the Muslim world. We must fight a jihad against the Zionist enemy, who covets not only Palestine, but the whole Arab region, including its holy places." The Yom Kippur War. The next military jihad to liberate Jerusalem occurred on October 6, 1973. Equipped with Soviet weapons, Muslim soldiers from Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and Palestine began the onslaught on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. In early October 1973, Israeli intelligence had advised Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir that Israel would be attacked. She telephoned U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who ordered her not to preempt the attack, and Meir acquiesced. In the first few days of the war, Israel lost half of its 1,700 tanks and 51 fighter jets, more than 10% of its air force. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan broke down and cried and suggested that Israel surrender to Egypt. The next day, Prime Minister Meir dispatched an urgent message to President Nixon, indicating Israel's situation was critical and asked for massive airlifts of American military equipment. Also that day, the chairman of Exxon, Mobil, Texaco, and Standard Oil contacted President Nixon with an urgent message that King Faisal stated an oil embargo would result if America assisted Israel. Richard Nixon feared Soviet domination of the Middle East if Israel was eliminated. Finally, giant American starlifters executed a massive military airlift through the Azores Islands, since no African or European government would allow their airports to be used for American planes to refuel. Only the American resupply and bravery in the field by Israeli General Ariel Sharon and his forces saved the Jewish state by trapping the Egyptian Third Army west of the Suez Canal and opening the road to Cairo. In January 1974, Henry Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy arranged troop disengagement agreements between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Syria. Egypt maintained a strip of territory on the east bank of the Suez Canal, and the Syrians a portion of the Golan Heights. And the Arab world ended its oil embargo. After consolidating their gains through Kissinger's diplomacy, Muslim countries pressed hard in diplomatic warfare to weaken Israel's international diplomatic position. Under pressure, most African and Third World countries broke diplomatic relations with Israel. Meanwhile, the PLO continued its campaign against Israel worldwide, including the deaths of 21 schoolchildren in Ma'alot in northern Israel in May 1974.
Mr. President, I have come today bearing an olive branch and a gun. Don't let the olive branch fall from my hand.
In 1975, the Soviet Muslim Third World Bloc at the United Nations succeeded in passing the Zionism equals Racism General Assembly resolution. A new kind of diplomatic offensive to contain, reduce, and eventually eliminate the Jewish tributary state was now in the offing. The diplomatic strategy against Israel. Sadat's peace based on justice. Sadat's strategy. On November 19, 1977, Egyptian President Mohammed Anwar Sadat made an unprecedented historic visit to Israel, marking the first time an Arab leader made significant public contact with the Jewish state. Israelis and Western observers viewed Sadat's mission to Israel as a fundamental ideological breakthrough. However, Sadat did not really break with the past.
This is a sacred mission for me.
A devout Muslim, Sadat did not give any legitimacy to Israel, as no Muslim could ever truly accept Jewish sovereignty. Sadat simply chose a different path to achieve the Islamization of Palestine by exercising a pre-existing Arab diplomatic strategy that would, through several diplomatic stages, eliminate Jewish statehood. The roots of the diplomatic strategy against Israel. Sadat's diplomatic strategy was not new. In 1947, Jordan's King Abdallah had proposed acceptance of Israel on the UN terms because Muslims would retain a huge geographical advantage, allowing them to ultimately defeat the Jews at a later time. Abdallah was correct. The pursuit of a military-only solution since 1948 resulted in the Jews gaining much more territory in each war. After the 1967 military failure, Cecil Hourani, an advisor to Tunisia's president, presented three objectives that were later wholly adopted by Egypt. 1. Containment of Israel, territorially and demographically, as a basis for 2. Weakening and de-Zionizing Israel as preparation for 3. The final transformation of Israel from a sovereign Jewish state into a Muslim state. Menachem Begin's psychology.
Sadat is an implacable enemy of Israel. He is no fool, but he is an enemy.
In May 1977, Israelis had swept the long-ruling Labor Party out of power, and Herut leader Menachem Begin, a disciple of Vladimir Ze'ev Jabotinsky, became prime minister.
What occupied territories? If you mean Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip, they are liberated territories.
Begin had been the leader of the Irgun Jewish underground that fought the British for independence in the years prior to Jewish statehood. The Irgun had bombed the British headquarters in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946. Begin's past had made him a target of accusations of being a terrorist by Israeli Labor Party politicians over the years. As such, he was psychologically predisposed to wanting to find a way to vindicate his past as well as triumph over his detractors. After the election, Begin resurrected the failed former defense minister, Moshe Dayan, appointing him foreign minister. Longtime Herut Party stalwart and author, Shmuel Katz, another Jabotinsky disciple, was passed over. Ezer Weitzman was made defense minister. Begin, Weitzman, and Dayan then engaged in secret negotiations with Boutros Ghali of Egypt, promising to give back all of the Sinai in exchange for peace. Sadat's Knesset speech, Peace Based on Justice. Before his speech to the Israeli Knesset, Anwar Sadat attended prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem.
إننا لا نستطيع أن نعاون بشيء على الإطلاق في رحلة السلام التي تقومون بها سوى أن نقدم الصلاة إلى الله ليؤازركم بقوته وبنعمته ولينصركم في كل خطوة.
In his speech to the Israeli Knesset, Anwar Sadat invoked the Islamic concept of peace based on justice, using the phrase 15 times.
بسم الله قررت أن أحضر إليك وإرادة واعية لكي نقيم السلام الدائم القائم على العدل. لن يكون اسما على مسمى ما لم يكن قائما على العدالة.
Justice, from the Islamic point of view, would require Israel to surrender all territory it gained in the 1967 conflict.
إن الانسحاب الكامل من الأرض العربية المحتلة بعد 67 ولا رجاء فيه لأحد أو من أحد.
Sadat used the name of God 25 times, suggesting that Muslim rule was the proper place for religious toleration.
ونحن نصر على تحقيق الانسحاب الكامل منها بما فيها القدس العربية. وإنما يجب أن تكون مدينة حرة مفتوحة لجميع المؤمنين وبدلا من إيقاظ أحقاد الحروب الصليبية فإننا يجب أن نحيي روح عمر بن الخطاب وصلاح الدين أي روح التسامح واحترام الحقوق.
Further, Sadat alludes to the illegitimacy of Jewish political independence anywhere in Palestine.
ولن أستطرد في سرد أحداث الماضي منذ صدور وعد بلفور ل60 عاما خلف. وإذا كنتم قد وجدتم المبرر القانوني والأخلاقي لإقامة وطن قومي على أرض لم تكن كلها ملك لكم، أنه لا طائل من وراء عدم الاعتراف بالشعب الفلسطيني وحقوقه في إقامة دولته وفي العودة.
The Islamic definitions of peace and justice would contain and minimize Israel geographically, making it indefensible, while Israel would lose its Jewish character due to millions of returning Muslims, thereby defeating Israel by means of diplomacy. In a statement equivalent to the Islamic offer of protection to Dhimmi, standardized in 635 by Khalid ibn al-Walid, once an enemy is defeated, Sadat offers,
أننا نقبل بالعيش معكم في سلام دائم وعاد. أنتم تريدون العيش معنا في هذه المنطقة من العالم، وأنا أقول لكم بكل الإخلاص إننا نرحب بكم بيننا بكل الأمن والأمان.
the Camp David Peace Accords.
If the president is gracious enough to invite me to Cairo, we shall continue that.
Really, I'm planning to invite him to Sinai.
Thank you, sir. To who?
Sinai.
Well, I invite you.
Eventually, formal Egyptian-Israeli negotiations ensued at Camp David under the guidance of U.S. President Jimmy Carter.
We are privileged to witness tonight a significant achievement in the cause of peace.
The Jewish people suffered much, too much, and therefore peace to us is a striving coming innermost from our heart and soul. Peace now celebrates a great victory.
To Israel and the West, the Camp David Agreement meant Western peace, while Egypt saw the agreement only as the first stage to the transformation of Israel.
The signing of the framework for the comprehensive peace settlement has a significance far beyond the event. It signals the emergence of a new peace initiative. In the weeks ahead, important decisions have to be made if we are to proceed on the road to peace.
It calls for the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Sinai.
In return for peace, Israel relinquished to Egypt the Sinai Peninsula, all the military airfields, oil wells, and civilian settlements it had built there.
It calls for the establishment of normal, peaceful relations between the two countries, including diplomatic relations.
To Israel and the West, diplomatic exchanges and visits to Egypt implied recognition of Jewish statehood, while Egypt saw it as only an insignificant formality. For each stage of withdrawal Israel completed, Egypt would grant another degree of normalization on the road to returning sovereignty to Islam. If Israel acted differently, degrees of normalization would be withdrawn. And finally, Sadat never called for peace or sulha, reconciliation with the Jews. He only proclaimed, no more war.
Let there be no more wars or bloodshed between Arabs and Israelis. Let there be no more suffering or denial of rights.
Muslim diplomatic advantage. Muslims had 1,400